these days, it seems everyone and their dog is expected to come up with a snappy little summary of what's going on in Greece at the moment, so here's my attempt. So the story of Greece is the story of interest rates. You know what interest rates are, right? Economists sometimes call them the price of money because they reflect how expensive it is to take loans out of the bank. If you want money, you can just go to the bank and borrow some, but in exchange the bank will force you to pay a certain rate in interest so that they can make money as you get around to paying it back. Every country has a government-run central bank that more or less sets the minimum rate of interest for private banks. I live in Canada, and because Canada's a pretty together country with a pretty strong economy, we have quite a low interest rate, which means it's relatively cheap for me to go to the bank and take out a big loan without suffering too much. However, if I lived in some screwy country like Venezuela, which has a very high interest rate, it would be very expensive for me to take out big loans from the bank, so I'd probably be less inclined to do that. A bank is also much more likely to give a big loan to someone who has the means of eventually paying it back. If you're a country or a person with a lot of stable sources of revenue coming in, it will be a lot easier to get a loan than if you're some poor deadbeat loser. Greece used to be a screwy country with a very high interest rate, but then one day they got rid of their own currency and adopted the euro, which had a built-in low interest rate. This was great news for the socialist government that was running Greece at the time because it meant it suddenly became a lot less expensive to take out gigantic loans of money from the bank to pay for all sorts of crazy things. Now the Greek story gets more controversial as it goes on, but basically everyone on both the right and the left agree that the Greek government did not act terribly responsibly in its early years of euro membership. Because they had access to all this easy new money, they were really able to go nuts providing their citizens with all sorts of super generous perks like free college tuition, a really early retirement age, and lots of really well-paid government jobs with super lavish benefits and pensions. But even when interest rates are low, you still have to have some kind of plan to eventually pay back all that money you borrowed. Particularly when you're a government whose only source of money comes from taxes. Particularly when you're a country like Greece where tax evasion and cheating is rampant. Particularly when there's a massive global recession and people are losing money faster than you can tax it. In the aftermath of the 2008 recession, the Greek government found itself in a giant hole of debt with no obvious way to pay back the money to all the banks it had borrowed it from. This was obviously embarrassing for the government, but also for the banks who had been operating on the assumption that Greece's deadbeat loser days were behind them. Oftentimes, governments in these sorts of situations just print more money, which isn't a great solution, but the Greeks couldn't even do that because they were now on the euro, and the euros are printed in Belgium or wherever. So the Greeks did the only thing they could do. They asked their friends for a loan. The friends, in this case being the so-called Troika, the International Monetary Fund and the two European Union financial institutions, the European Central Bank and the European Commission. Since 2011, the Troika has repeatedly given Greece hundreds of billions of dollars in financial bailouts in order to keep their economy afloat. But there were strings attached. In order to earn their money, the Troika said that the Greek government had to stop spending so much and start scaling back some of those super generous perks they were giving everybody. This meant a higher retirement age, lower wages for government employees, and a whole host of other cutbacks to welfare and entitlements. This is what they call austerity. And this is where things get controversial. If you're a conservative like Angela Merkel, the German leader who basically controls the European financial institutions, then you're likely to subscribe to a philosophy that says that a smaller government that spends less money is the best way to jumpstart a broken economy. However, if you're a liberal, like the politicians who run Greece, then you're likely to believe that a government needs to spend money to stimulate economic growth. Not necessarily spend money on crazy pensions and stuff, but spend money on stimulus projects like President Obama did in the United States. Regardless, the Greek economy still sucks. Maybe the austerity reforms were too crippling, or maybe the Greeks just aren't doing them properly, but either way, job creation is still way too low, which means the country is still losing money faster than it can generate it. They've gone through all the loans, and the government still can't pay its bills. In January, the Greeks elected an ultra-liberal prime minister who had campaigned on a platform of no more austerity. Then this past Sunday, the Greeks voted to further reject austerity conditions in an explicit referendum on the subject. So the situation is kind of a standoff. The Greek banks have almost literally no money left at this point because nobody's willing to lend them any. And no one's willing to lend them any because they won't accept any conditions for the loans. Something eventually is going to have to break. If neither side is willing to change their mind, either the current Greek government will have to fall and be replaced with some other government more willing to make a deal, or the Europeans will have to kick Greece out of the euro and just let them solve their own damn problems. Which solution sounds better to you? Write your answer in the comments below. And then print them out and mail them to Europe because they could sure as hell use the advice.